There we go.
Oh, it's that now. It says live. Okay. Welcome, hello to Virtual Trek Cons, the influence of strong women in Star Trek. And I am joined today with three outstanding women. We have Nana Visitor, who played Colonel Kira on Deep Space Nine. We have Mary Chieffo, mother of Klingons, Chancellor L'Rell, and Amy Imhoff, who is spoken on many Star Trek panels. And you have a special connection with Star Trek as well, right?
I do. I'm working with Kate Mulgrew now, and she's fantastic. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me, and this is going to be a great panel.
Yes. So we'd like to start off exploring the evolution of women's roles in Star Trek, starting with Nichelle Nichols, obviously, and how it's evolved to Kira and L'Rell, and how the material has grown.
Mhm.
So, and I know, Nana, you were a watcher of the original series, so I was wondering how that influenced you. Or did Nichelle Nichols have an influence on you and Kira and your work?
As an actor, yes, very definitely. I took what I loved about what Nichelle did is that she would watch the destruction of worlds with a professional eye. This is what she did every day. There were disasters. There were reasons to stay calm and collected and be ready for action, be ready to do what she did, her job. She was always ready. And I took that part of it and realized that's what it takes. That's the world. And I think she showed that so brilliantly.
I also think seeing that Nichelle, also the other like peripheral women on TOS, they were not in roles that were too prominent, but they were there. And just to have someone like Whoopi Goldberg be able to look at the screen and say, Mom, there's a Black woman on TV and she's not playing a maid. Incredible for and the first interracial kiss, and just so many of the barriers that they broke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely made huge strides for the time. There are still some issues with education and all of that stuff, and women being used as ornaments rather than driving the story. But that, I think, evolved in TNG with characters like Guinan and Crusher and Troy. But then it was shooken in my
We were shooketh
with
Kira,
who was a fully realized person. She had layers and depth, and she carried the story often. And I've seen parallels between Kira and L'Rell rewatching Discovery. Mary, would you mind?
Yeah, I love that, and it's an honor to have any parallels drawn between me and Major Kira. So I'm very honored by that. And I was speaking to everyone before this that I have been doing a Deep Space Nine rewatch, and yeah, just from the get-go, Kira's intro of being so independent and strong and opinionated. And building that relationship with Sisko off the bat in her strength is just it was inspiring to watch when I first did, and seeing it again is just very exciting. And something that I have been thinking about that parallel is they're so both L'Rell and Kira are so respectful of their heritage and have such a deep connection to to where they're from, which is not Federation. Like that's something that's really striking me overall with the Deep Space Nine rewatch is how many main non-Federation characters you have, and what a great nuance that brings to the storytelling. I think an important nuance, because the world of the future is not just the Federation. And while L'Rell's storyline, of course, takes place far earlier in the timeline, and we meet the Klingons when they haven't interacted with humans for over 100 years. But that same level of as the series progresses and her interaction with humans, with anything non-Klingon, she learns a lot, much the way Kira continues to learn about why the Federation behaves the way they does. It doesn't mean that they entirely, either of them, lose their integrity of their own species, but they certainly allow themselves to listen and learn, which I think is a sign of a true leader, is someone who sticks to their own morals, but is willing to compromise and understand why people are coming from different directions. So that is something that I've been picking up on, and I love that. I think that's also, such a true Trek thing to have, that we get that window in to those types of characters through having alien species. Yeah.
Also, I just seeing in the comments, someone said Kira is fire, and I love that.
Yes.
And also, this is live, and we are taking questions. I saw a couple people asking that, so fantastic. And just on going off what you were saying, I just thought of this parallel just now when you were saying this, Mary, is that Bajor was just being brought into the Federation when Deep Space Nine started. It was like they're kind of like new members. They're not 100% sure what their, what their role is going to be. Just like, when we see L'Rell, Klingons are not part of the Federation. That like peace treaty hasn't really happened. It's not really seen as like a Federation member. So the importance of the characters that are outside coming into the Federation are kind of what makes the Federation diverse. It what makes the Federation, function in its really like true sense. And I think seeing Nana as not a Starfleet officer, but still working so closely with Sisko, with Dr. Bashir, with O'Brien, with everybody, is a great dynamic to have, because she's not held to some of the same rules. And like I'd love to hear Nana talk a little bit about what it was like kind of operating outside those rules.
I felt like I had to get comfortable with the idea of being unlikable. And that means I wasn't accepted because I was doing something different than what other people intended for me to do. Not that I was wrong, although she often was, but that I had to get comfortable with an audience that didn't want to see that. With people at Paramount who didn't.
I feel like Mary knows your feel. She knows.
Yeah, and you just and that, I think, is when you make some difference, when you go, no, this is my integrity, this is what I believe the truth of this is, and how someone responds to post-traumatic stress, to being surrounded in the way that she was with people with very, very different points of view, and just accept that you're not going to be liked. That's what the experience was for me early on. It felt like a struggle, and I remember when I was asked to soften myself. Can't remember if it was the second or third season, but it's when the high heels come in. And I remember we were on break, and I fought it with everything in my body was enraged and hot with the idea that I'd have to wear heels, that I would have to conform with some kind of sexualized version of myself. The way I talked myself through it was to go, if I can do it in flat boots, I can do the same thing in heels. It's not about the clothes. It's not about the clothes in the second, third, or fourth place. It's not about that. What am I doing? What's my character doing? And that struggle it was uncomfortable. It wasn't fun. It wasn't like, no one likes me and I'm really cool with it. It was tough. Of course I wanted to
And
be
women
like.
struggle so much with the society expectation of being likable. And
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to hear all of you talk about that. And Melissa too, just because you're moderating doesn't mean you can't talk about it.
But yeah.
And being pretty, those two
Oh
things.
yeah.
And I just read a quote, and I can't remember who said it, of pretty isn't rent you pay for being a female, and taking up space. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying. I mean, I was just like, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm so grateful ultimately for the opportunity to play a flawed, interesting, complex female character. I mean, it's such a gift. But I absolutely agree with the feeling of, and I really struggled in the first season because for the first half, you get a window into Laurel maybe isn't evil, but a lot of people believed a lot of her actions were at the surface level were led to believe that they were extremely malicious. And ultimately, when you find out that, it's not, quite as malicious, it's still very Klingon, but that she had the Klingon integrity in mind. And so I struggled as a very happy, pleasant human person with seeing people reacting very intensely to the story they were being told, rightfully so. And I really had to, I did a lot of personal writing at the time, just in stuff I couldn't vocalize on the internet because I couldn't. To give away
God forbid for a woman on the internet with an opinion.
It's crazy. But that I overall, like, I'm so grateful for that experience, and with Laurel too, the fact that I think the frustration I seem to hear from people, some people just love it and go for it, but I think people struggle with the fact that they don't absolutely hate her, and yet they don't like everything she does. Like, everyone wants to live in these binaries of like good, bad, like, and she doesn't live in that. She lives in the gray. And I love that about Kira as well, is that while they have a lot of integrity and but are sometimes wrong, but they learn from their mistakes.
Right.
And it's so important and so groundbreaking. And there wouldn't be a Laurel without a Kira. And like, that is just so important in our storytelling, that we need to see that. And it's definitely, filtered into my own life. And again, as someone who does have a lot of energy and has been told to calm down a lot, and
oh girl, I feel you.
And
but also I think for you and a little for me, we're both very tall women, and I think occupying space, like Dana was saying, is such a huge thing, that you feel like you're too tall and too big and too this and too that to be allowed to be able to flourish, and you want to shrink yourself. I have pictures of myself in college and high school where I have my arms around my friends and I'm like scrunching, and I'm like, no, you have to stand up, and I want to hear Mary talk more about. We've talked about that with our badass warrior ladies.
It's true. I mean, I often say that it's my journey on this earth is that I am 6 feet tall, and that is a part of my bigness, but it is coupled with my big energy. And I think exactly for any woman occupying space energetically, like for me, it is partly the fact that people meet me and go, wow, you're up there. and
because you rock your 4-inch heels like you should.
I love my giant combat boots. What can I say? But I do feel that yes, there were small ways in which I would compensate for my size, whether it be and also my intellect. That was a big thing in college that my voice and speech teachers really got on me about, was I would say a very intelligent statement and go, but I don't know. Or, something, just a way to cushion it so that it wasn't as fully realized, even though everything I was saying was totally valid. And that's part of what Laurel has continued to give me, her journey from literally seeing herself as no one within the Klingon world to having to lead the Empire. Like, that was very much resonated with me during my time. And this was such a big first job, and like being intimidated and scared and feeling like, where do I belong? So I have felt like with all of my characters, luckily, they all bring out really interesting aspects of myself. So I've really tried to learn from Laurel standing in her power. And I love that she is innately strong from the beginning, and yet she doesn't realize it. Like, that, I think, is a very important thing to see as well, that she doesn't even realize her own capacity.
Well, we see her when she's kind of in this pantheon of men.
Yes.
And you know, you have your fellow Klingon. What did someone called her, like the Klingon with the bling on?
Oh my god. I hadn't.
You got to tell her that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, but you see her and you don't immediately pick her out as someone who's going to be changing the action. She's,
Yeah.
you know, and I've talked about this with the Nas, you know, the concept of feminist agency. And I have my master's in literature, so I kind of bring that to this discussion as well, which is feminist agency being that the female character has the ability to drive her own action and to change her fate and the fate of many.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear everybody talk about that a little bit too.
Well, yeah, change her fate and the fate of many. That is agency. And now I'm finding a more, it's as a storyteller, a more subtle place for it. Because if it, I find myself more an old crone now, is my truth. And what does that mean? Sometimes it means going up into the mountain and taking a stick and digging in the dirt of your, fertile ground, all by yourself. Mm. And as a storyteller, I go, well, am I affecting the fate of many? No, but the story of a woman having the right and being fully realized as a human, to take that time to be an old crone is valuable, maybe to many, maybe to one. And if it's just one girl watching and going, I have the right to go off by myself and figure it out. Mm-hmm. And not be a leader for a minute, not be a follower, join that when I need to, but follow what my path is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what true liberation is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I've always said that I want to be the role model I was looking for, that and by being the best version of myself, I'm not going to be anybody else, but I can hopefully ignite a fire within someone that gets them to find their own greatest truth. And I'm so grateful that that is part of what we get to do as actors and artists, is that by really tapping into that truth, other people can be inspired to do so. Yeah. All the archetypes. I love you bringing in the, go ahead. I love archetypes and all that, just like the hero's journey and storytelling. And I think the more we embrace them and continue to expand upon them, that's where I'm feeling we are, just like as a society right now, is there will always be there. So it's how do we respect that and keep expanding on it, and particularly with the female archetypes. And the divine feminine was a huge element for me in the second season as Chancellor. And speaking to the when you were talking about costume as well and heels, because I did end up being much more feminized in the second season, and figuring out, I felt it made sense, within the plot, within this patriarchal world, that as Chancellor, she had to subscribe to the norms more. And that was part of Gersha Phillips, our incredible costume designer's conceit, was, aside from wanting to just give me fun, fabulous outfits, the fact that I did have cleavage, and like there was the notorious Klingon boob window, like all of these things that we've seen in the past, and how these women have been sexualized in good or bad ways. How is L'Rell trying to grapple with that as a leader, and ultimately, instead of leaning more towards, within the Madonna whore dichotomy, leaning more towards actually the mother, which kind of falls in between.
The mother trope, I think, Melissa, you wanted to talk a little bit about that too.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mary was about to touch on it, but it's interesting how L'Rell becomes essentially the mother of Klingons with the birth of her son, and the revolutionizing of her people, and I think it's interesting to see how mothers have changed on Trek as well. because they couldn't like in TNG, they couldn't necessarily be mother and doctor. It was always a separate thing. But on Deep Space Nine with Keiko, she was a botanist and a mother, and worked together with that, and
then Kira kind of taking on to work in your pregnancy and being a mother on the set of Star Trek, yourself being a mother. That's something I find just fascinating, because I've sometimes heard some of the men surrounding the show and the production of the show comment on that, and I've heard you talk about it a little bit, Nana, and just the way that they work that in, and just talking about that mother trope.
Yeah, it's funny with all the archetypes. I used to think that it was there was a progression, and then you got to Old Crone. But now that I'm there, actually, I realize you keep rifling through them all, and sometimes in a day, they're all available and all true. And that's something I didn't understand before. But getting back to the mother aspect, yeah, it's something that I had to. I remember Buster, my oldest son, being on set, and he learned how to be quiet, and he learned how to be there because we had to be together during the day because the days were so damn long. And he would come on set, and he would actually tell Grips, "Red light."
That's so cute. That's so cute.
He was trained, boy. And I remember being in some kind of crazy getup with the biggest weapon. And I was in, and I was like, oh my God, my son is seeing this. And then I went, yeah, my son is seeing this. This is part of it. This is mama at work. This is.
We have a comment, Nana, from the comments. If you could move closer to your mic, because people are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh no, that's terrible. I'm supposed to use my outside voice, and we just moved into this house, and where I am right now is really echoey, so it's going to sound like, I'm sure the next mountain can hear me, but I'll do it.
Thank you. Loud. Yeah, we just want to make sure everyone hears your awesome insights.
So sorry, everybody. That's awful. But yeah, so part of being a mother on Star Trek for me was accepting that my son is going to see his mother working, his mother shooting weapons, his mother being even a sexualized person. It was the full gamut he experienced me as.
And do you think that L'Rell, if she had been a mother to raise her child, that would have been, seems like it's part of Klingon culture to respect the mother as the life giver and as a strong warrior role. It's not seen as something that puts you on a sideline.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting overall, and I have been I looked at it initially when I was looking at all the Klingon centric episodes, and I often reference the Grilka episode, because the whole premise of that is that she cannot succeed her house because she's a woman and has to marry Quark.
Imagine having to marry Quark so you could do your thing.
Like this incredibly badass woman who has such a cool intro in her cape and all this stuff is has to marry this guy in order. It's okay, this is a great commentary on so many things. But that was definitely a moment. I had been witnessing that throughout with the Klingon culture, but I was like, oh, so it really is a patriarchy, and it really is, the women, powerful as they are, and certainly to Federation human eyes, very intimidating. For the most part, and we see that with Cirilla as well, with Martok, that their responsibility and their power is in the house, which is a totally respectful thing to be. But that was definitely a key in to L'Rell from the get-go, that she was not that. She was a commander, so she was already an outlier. And T'Kuvma's house was the kind of outsider house to begin with. So she was, and that was why she loved Vogue so much, was that they were both very much on the outside. But to your question about motherhood and that tie-in, I found that her journey in Point of Light in the second season was that she had to do what unfortunately many women have to do, is cut off all of their affections, cut off their loved ones in order to maintain their job. And that's what Georgiou, who is the empress of a very cutthroat world, tells her to do. And so of course Georgiou's going to tell her that, because that's the society that she existed in. So it's, you know, it's a shame that Cornwell didn't come in and say like, hey, Laurel, maybe you don't have to do this whole really big theatrical thing where you pretend to kill your lover and your son. But
It's very Shakespearean though, Mary.
Oh, believe me, as an actor, thrilled. Absolutely. When I read that speech, I was like, are they really going to let me do this? Like, am I actually going to like tell people to call me mother, like in a full, and so that was such a thrill. And again, the archetype of it is just so incredible. But I found too a huge parallel to the Queen Elizabeth I and Virgin Queen, and the way in which so many women have had to create an archetype for themselves in order for people to listen to them. I find Laurel's plot very tragic throughout, like, but powerful and empowering, but very tragic, that all the people that she loves ultimately are taken away from her, but she is so you know, set on upholding her culture. And again, looking at the parallels with Kira, like, is so respectful of where she comes from and wants to maintain that integrity, that she's willing to make those sacrifices for the greater whole. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's obviously a lot of commentary and controversy within all of those plot lines, but I think overall, that is a huge part of her journey, is sacrifice for the greater whole. Yeah.
And Melissa and I were discussing about how, you know, she had grown up watching Kira and watching, you know, the women of DS9 and Voyager. And, you know, I'm curious what your thoughts are, Melissa, on seeing that and seeing the progression of like the over sexualized, you know, the caregiver roles on TNG to Kira and now to Laurel. Like, how did you grow up in that, and how did that shape you?
Well, honestly, I didn't really connect with the over sexualized roles, so I didn't really pay much attention to them. What made me sit up and take notice of Kira was because she had a voice, and I know in growing up for me, a lot of times I was, you know, meant to be seen and not heard. So there was a lot of, and I'm still trying to find my voice, and she has her voice, and she's was a good example of how this strong woman had something to say, and people paid attention, and rightfully so. But at the same time, she accepted the choices that she made, whether they were right or wrong, and accepted the consequences that came with those choices. And that was important to see as well. Mm-hmm. And struggling through carving your own path, as Nana was saying, finding your own journey, that Kira was helpful in that. And I see that a lot in Laurel too, where she's put in a situation where it is a male-dominated society, but she's carving her way through to leading the charge of Klingons, you know. Yeah, this is the head of the empire.
Yeah, and I loved, because it's like, it's also like, I say this about any leader, and certainly now I'm like, God bless you, like
I know, right?
Wanting this, or like you're just being willing to take the mantle of leadership, because it's a hard job. No, like even the best of the leaders, it's complicated, and you struggle, and no one is ever, like, not everyone is going to agree with you ever, and like it's just such a difficult position to put yourself in, and yet we need those people, and I think we need those women specifically, who I believe have a very strong aptitude for leadership. I was just talking with a friend earlier today about directing, and the willingness to just put yourself out there, like have the confidence of a straight white cis male and just say, hey, I'd like to direct
Yes.
that.
My favorite is have the confidence of a mediocre white man named Chad.
But I think, you know, there's you know, there's something to that I think it's great that I'm glad that I'm someone that tends to overthink and be like, I don't know, maybe I'm not ready, but find that balance of being like, okay, I don't think I'm ready, but I'm going to make the leap anyway, because this is clearly needed right now. And like I said, for Laurel, certainly realizing that her society needs that more than she needs to be in the shadows. That's the more important thing. This is a slight tangent, but it's just staying in my brain and I don't want to lose it, because I think it's important to note too that both of these characters are alien women. And
yes,
it was right in the beginning what you were saying, Nana, about like the way in which people may judge those characters. I found too, not only as a woman, but as an alien, people would hold Laurel to human standards instead of taking into account that it's like, that's not the society she grew up in. And Kira's past and being with the Kardashians, like it totally makes sense that they have the mentalities they do based off of their experiences. But I find it a really interesting thing that I probably would note if I were just an audience member in people's comments, but particularly because I take it so personally, because I've thought a lot about why she behaves the way she does. I think it's one of the most fascinating, and it's such a great gift as an actor to really see, oh, you're totally saying that this is how a human would behave, but we're not human. So yeah.
Right.
And I'd also like to point out that it's a gift at both Mary and Nana's commitment to bringing the truth of Laurel and Kira to the screen and not shying away from, well, no, they're not going to like me because of this, and this, and actually committing full head on to the roles. Otherwise, you know, they would just be like any other role. Oh, here, yeah.
And I think that another difference between Kira, Nana, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you, first of all. And then second of all, it was also at a time in the 90s, there was, I don't know if they still have a Q rating, but it was really your likability factor.
Ooh.
And it mattered if you got work based on how much you were likable. And they used to say, when you went into a room of producers, the most important thing, and I was told this by an agent, I won't say the word, but that they wanted to go to bed with you. It was like, well, do I want to go to bed with you? No. So I don't think
Yeah. And so we actually,
what the role was.
Wow.
And that was part of it. So pleasing and being likable and it so Star Trek, and by the way, Major Kira, as far as I know, was written by men.
Yeah.
We are getting a couple comments about what do you think about how Star Trek, especially Deep Space Nine, was written, produced, and directed almost entirely by men.
Well,
so.
My first comment is they wrote Major Kira. They wrote her and said, go on and do that. And really didn't stop me very much. Only when they got outside pressure is what I understand, that then they said, okay, look, but we gotta, you know, so that in itself was impressive. They also didn't hide my pregnancy. Another big, you know, kudos to them. And that whole producing team. But yeah, as I was saying, it's just to go against being likable, being pleasing, all the things I was taught to be as not just an actor, but as a woman. It's Star Trek gave me the opportunity to go, okay, here's a reset. And certainly I took it. I had a seed, you know, of that in me, but it certainly flourished after I did 7 years of Star Trek.
And I think seeing Ira talk about it in the Deep Space Nine documentary, was really incredible to see. I having met Ira and interviewed Ron Moore and Brian Fuller and everyone, they are some really excellent feminist men, and it's definitely a kudo to them that they created characters like Kira and Dax and Zial and Moogie and all the DS9 ladies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm so glad this is coming up too, because in being a part of the franchise for now a fair amount of time, like I'm still we're still the newbies, but I'm I feel like I'm
You're in it.
I'm in it now. But I have always been an advocate for representation on screen, but I have had a new fire lit under me about representation behind the scenes. And I do agree, like, it is important to celebrate and acknowledge allies. And I say allies and advocates, because that's the difference. Is like, of course, compromise, like I said, Laurel does it too. Like, we all have to work with a lot of different cooks in the kitchen, and it's a collaborative art form. So that's part of it. But I do think, I hope that this conversation needs to be had, because it's easy when it's just what we're seeing on screen. It's like, oh, look, it's a multitude of people of different units, super great. But you need those allies and advocates, and now I think there are huge pushes for writers' rooms to be more diverse, or normalized is actually a term that I've been hearing and really liking. That it's not about that's still kind of others diverse, like to make it diverse as if it's like the thing that we're creating, as opposed to like, let's just make it look like the world that we're in. So I've been liking that term, but the more that we normalized our writers' rooms, also from the top up, like Nona, you were saying, it's like, even if the people at the core are on your side, they're still having to answer to higher ups and higher ups. So it's like, I'm hoping that is the journey that we're on right now, is making those spaces more and more normalized, so that the person making that final decision is of a some sort of other. And I hate the term other.
Yeah, the othering of basically anyone that isn't a white cisgendered man is we're really trying to get away from that as an industry. And it's, as someone who studies television and sees what's going on behind the scenes, it's so fantastic to see Hanelle Culpepper and to see that she's the first woman of color to be directing a premiere of Star Trek, probably the first woman, period, to be directing a premiere of Star Trek. And just the representation we have in Discovery is above and beyond even what we had in Deep Space Nine. Has a huge cast, and they are of significant diversity, which is wonderful. But the women, when we look at the convention lineup for women, it's a lot of white ladies. So it's really glad to have Discovery cast come in and to represent that for female fans of color.
Yeah. And I think, and infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Like, the beauty of that is our work is never done. Like, that there's still room to keep expanding, which is wonderful.
But still, there are people at the absolute top, the ones who are green light projects. We won't have interesting, who are diverse.
Yeah.
We won't have the stories that they want to see from their childhood, from their lives. Our stories are we have a couple of stories, it seems.
Yeah.
Filmed, it's getting better.
Yeah.
But it has to be from the top and seeping all the way down.
Yeah, absolutely.
To grips. And everybody.
Yeah.
And I think the push too, like I mentioned, Gersha, who's our incredible costume designer, and I've definitely celebrated that in any way that I can amplify and just make people aware of who's working behind the scenes. And I think there's a large push for that overall. There was for so long this sort of like, here it is, and magic happens and this happens, but now we're getting to say, like, look at this female director, look at this female costume designer of color, and whatever that combination may be, like that acknowledgement, whether it be a behind the scenes video or just a post. I think that's really important, because people watching the show may love it but don't see themselves as the actors in it. but want to be a
Yeah.
part of it. So the more that they can see, oh, there are so many other ways that I can contribute to this storytelling. Like, so I think it's very important to celebrate that too.
I like Bowie Young Kim as
Yeah.
one of the writers, and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and just seeing Sonequa and Rekha Sharma and I don't want to mispronounce her name on the bridge crew.
Oh, Oyen.
Oyen, yes,
Yeah.
Oyen,
Mhm.
who I've met and is lovely.
Yeah.
And it's, just seeing just the diversity of just even the background bridge crew on Discovery, just the people walk. I read a criticism of, Rogue One when they're walking through in Star Wars, when she's walking through with Mon Mothma, and they're walking through the people in the rebellion, and everyone around them that is doing something, acting busy, fixing a ship, running supplies. It's all like dudes. It's like where's
Right.
all the women working on? Where are the Kaylee Firefly type engineers?
Yeah.
I mean, look at B'Elanna. B'Elanna was a huge evolution.
Yeah.
I have a very good friend who is a doctor, and she's a woman, a Latina woman of color, and she loved. She said, she's the only one. She said B'Elanna was the only woman in STEM that I ever saw growing up, and that's just you're like terrible.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that exactly the seeing people in the background is just as important. Like you just to see things more normalized, this term that I love now, is just so essential, because it makes you realize that that's what you want to see. And I definitely have realized, because I grew up, I literally called the like action and sci-fi movies boy movies, and it was this cool thing that my dad and I did together, which because I loved them. But I was like, it was cool for me to be the girl that liked boy movies, and that was because it was mostly men in them. But I still love the storytelling, and I didn't, for the most part, see myself in a lot of, certainly on the film side of things, represented. And now, looking at a show like Discovery, and then looking back at Deep Space Nine, when you do have more of a wealth, you're like, oh, why would I accept anything other than this?
I know, right?
I look back at movies that I really loved, and I'm like, gosh, like, I'm a little mad.
You get a little mad when you get a little older and you realize. I would sit in feminist classes in college and be like,
yeah,
like, don't realize it.
There's a Bechdel test, and there's like a Chieffo test that my friends joke about, like that. With certain films, my dear friend Eve is a big movie buff, and she's more tolerant. She is a very strong feminist herself, but is a little bit more like, there are no women in this film. That's okay. I'm gonna watch. But so often,
maybe for some of our viewers, you could define the Bechdel test for them.
Oh yeah, Bechdel test is created by. Do you remember her first name, Bechdel? It is
yes, it is. It's oh my God, it'll come to me. She just Alison Bechdel.
And she wrote actually Fun Home, which they
yes, I love Fun Home.
A graphic novel that then they turned into the musical. But the test essentially is, if two women are in a scene together speaking about something other than a man, it's
like two women with a name who talk to each other about something other than a man.
Yeah, and I think it has to be at least a minute or 2 minutes. I don't remember.
The time frame is I think not as often applied, but yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But generally, and I know, I forget who did well, maybe it was Women at Warp that they did.
It was Jara Hodge from Women at Warp. She watched every single episode of Star Trek and applied the Bechdel test.
And it gets better and better with each show. And part of that,
with Enterprise, it goes way down.
Oh yeah. Right back.
but having Kira, I mean, Kira had so many, and Dax being the science officer,
exactly.
And and definitely we talked about wanting to hear about the relationship between women on the show, because that's such an important, having Kira and Dax be good friends and be lifting each other up, like women lifting each other up, was such a part of our conversation that we had leading up to this panel. And I'd love to hear everybody talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it was interesting to hear Ira talk, because he said we missed the boat with having more of a relationship between the women. We had a friendship, but it wasn't as developed as it could be, really. We could have had much more of a relationship, I think. And he doesn't know why that happened. It was just a missed opportunity. So many stories to tell.
Mhm.
But in hindsight, and I agree, I feel like that could be an interesting story now, Kira and Dax. What do you-
I would love to see.
Oh
What
my
do you what do you think Kira and is up to now?
I don't know. It's a collaborative art, and they provided the situations, and I provided my responses to those situations. So without the situations, I don't know. I don't know where she is. I don't know how she ends up.
But she's lifting other women up. That is what she's doing.
I would hope so, but
Yeah.
she decided to go sit in a tree. I don't know. But the story of that would lift women up because they would see that she was doing what was correct for her. It's all I can think. So I'm not sure, but I could hope, and I could hope that she and Dax are doing something extremely interesting.
Yeah.
Something really interesting. Something I don't know, biodynamic comes to mind. I don't know.
I love that.
And also, Kira was a mentor for Zial, and unfortunately she died. And but just seeing Kira as a mentor, I think to young girls watching, and Mary said she's rewatching Deep Space Nine, and that kind of thing.
I love that relationship. I loved a mentoring relationship. I wish it could have been longer. I truly think it had something to do with the makeup. They couldn't find a woman who would come back a second time. It seemed there were 3 different Zials, so it better work.
Yeah.
But I would have loved that. Another opportunity, again, just not time for the story. I would have loved more of a relationship between the baby I bore and the biological mother. I would have loved for the 2 of us to have had a relationship. That would be very interesting to me as well.
Yeah.
And I would expect that Kira wouldn't necessarily be responding correctly and just go, "Oh, here's your child. I have no feelings about this, and it's okay." I think the complication of emotions, whether they're correct or incorrect, would have been very interesting in that relationship. Not with O'Brien, with Keiko.
Right.
Yeah, we rarely saw Keiko conversing with the other ladies.
It was just kind of like a handoff of the baby. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that's so.
I feel like they started to go there in the beginning when Keiko invited you to move in, but there wasn't much beyond that.
No, and that can what they played with, which was interesting as well, was the complication with O'Brien.
Right.
From feeling of a mother and a woman who has born her child. That's interesting to me. That's something that could really be explored.
Yeah. Well,
that's the next one.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because just tying back into the that is part of why my championing, not that I have much power in that regard, but wanting to at least vocalize the representation behind the scenes, because I do think that's a great example of like a woman writing would instinctively, whether they'd had a child or not, know that there is a relationship to Pine there. And I found too, like, for me, my relationship with Cornwell, with the magnificent Jane Brooke, that there was such a strong response to the fact, these women whose introduction was screaming in each other's faces, but then built a friendship as a consequence.
Seeing them screaming at each other, like you don't see that on TV. Like no matter if it's Star Trek, sci-fi, anything else, rarely do you see 2 women screaming in each other's faces on television because, as Nana said, God forbid that Q rating goes down and they're not likable.
Yeah, and I will say that episode was written by Kirsten Beyer, our incredible
who is awesome,
writer.
And we have to give her props. She is a great voice to have at the table.
Yes, and just hugely, proactive both with Discovery and Picard, and she knows canon so well and all of that. But it is interesting to note that is the episode that she wrote in the first season. But aside from that, I think, I know Suniko and I also found this in our finale of the first season, and she's spoken to this as well, that when she does give me the detonator, there was a line that unfortunately was cut for time, or I don't know. But Giorgio, as she's about to, she, says, Giorgio, give her the thing so she can put her handprint. And Giorgio's like, why would you give this to your enemy? And Burnham said, today she is not my enemy. And
they cut that?
yeah.
That's an awesome line. And we haven't talked about Burnham enough, and we haven't talked about Janeway, but this is an hour-long panel. And you guys are the people here, so we want to focus on you guys.
Yeah, but yeah,
that's such a powerful scene. That was such a powerful scene you had.
Yeah, and it was still, I think, ultimately it was partly because Sonequa and I adore each other so deeply and have a deep respect, and just, again, there's so much I could say about Burnham and Sonequa, but her as a leader and being our number one and being such a mother to us all in many ways, while also being a literal mother, the way that she brought us all together. But this was a culmination, and we hadn't had much screen time together. Our characters had been paralleled throughout the season, and luckily, because she would organize game nights and movie nights, I was getting to know her, and we were doing press and stuff, but we didn't really get to act much. So we were like taking this moment together, like, oh yes. We actually got reprimanded for loving each other too much.
You got reprimanded.
But that element of like, we saw that, and the parallel that ended up happening that it was also cut was after I say I'm no one, and then Tyler Vogt speaks to me, then I make that decision and said to her in Klingon, today you are not my enemy. And that's when I accept the detonator. And so I think these moments, these seeds are there, and we need to keep watering them and keep letting those flowers and trees and, forests grow, because it's so right there. And I think, to like speaking of Kirsten, again, I remember talking to her about the finale for the first season. And when you look at it, it's all the women that kind of come together. You have
and Cornwell comes in. And I loved that.
Yeah.
And DS9, like you said, DS9 did not necessarily get the woman, like the woman of Marvel, like all joining together kind of a vibe.
But yeah, I mean, but definitely it's, it's there. Like, again, like what I feel in loving the franchise as a whole and watching the different shows is like, you do see such a clear progression. And I do give huge credit to the actors like Nana, who brought their full selves and made those characters who they were. Like, that's a huge part of it. It is the energy that fans respond to. They feel the character, and sometimes the writing reflects the energy, and sometimes it maybe doesn't quite rise to it. And that's, that's art. We're all just trying to make it work. And it doesn't mean that it's coming from a malicious place on the part of anybody behind the scenes. It's just, I think, that's what I witnessed too. And certainly the other, characters that did inspire me growing up, it was their energy. And sometimes the plot rose to the occasion of the energy I was seeing in the character, but more often than not, it's that essence that I responded to. I'm like, wow, she's really standing in her power, or like, that's something that seems really aspirational. But yeah, just with the finale, I remember Kirsten Beyer saying it was inevitable that the women would basically save the world, because if I hadn't had the relationship with Cornwell, I don't think I would have been primed to accept Burnham's generosity. Then Cornwell is already doing her other stuff and listening to Burnham and then Giorgio even is willing to help at the end of the day. Like, she is within her own mere universe opinions, still willing to come.
And we didn't even get, and we only have like 6 minutes left, but we didn't even get a chance to talk about Intendant Kira, who I found very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And that was, I'm sure that we can, if we have a part 2 of this ever, we'll have even more topics. But we got a great question from a viewer, which is, which female world leader, past or present, do you feel represents your character?
Ooh.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah.
It's a really good one. One I probably can't answer. I would have to go off to my tree. I've been and think about that one before I could give you an answer. I'm not sure.
I think Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand right now, I feel Kira vibes in her, because she's a mom. She's basically like nursing her baby while saving the world from coronavirus.
Very cool. I like that.
Takes no shenanigans. She is awesome.
What do you think about Laurel? Do you see a parallel? Are we still not there yet?
No, I mean, I think because being in this Klingon society, we actually got to go a little bit more in the past. And I, like I said, the Queen Elizabeth I, certainly that ascension was a huge source of inspiration in the second season. And then this is kind of the possibly. I was always fascinated by Hatshepsut, who was a female pharaoh. She was not a queen; she was a pharaoh. She dressed like a male pharaoh and like had the little beard whatever thing, and when she died she became queen by a fluke. Like her son was too young and she was kind of his whatever that word is, you know what I'm saying, like not caretaker but his
like yes, she's like the queen regent or something.
Yeah,
they call
like
that.
Yeah.
Oh.
But then really did a lot of stuff, and one of her monuments is still in existence. But legend has it that all of the images of her were destroyed immediately after she died, and they don't know who. But I always wondered, as I was, living in Laurel and exploring her journey, I was also like, why isn't she talked about, other than the literal reason that this show is being written at a later time? But I found it interesting that it's a truth that we unfortunately see a lot, particularly with female leaders, or leaders who do not fit the typical mold,
who don't conform.
their history is erased. And so that's just something that's more of my fun creative brain being like, why don't we talk about Laurel, which I still think there's room to explore, why that is true.
That's
yeah. I'm glad you think so.
So maybe, do you guys have a character on Star Trek that you feel like you love and admire? Obviously you love and admire your own characters, but who else did you find to be really awesome and inspirational for you?
Inspirational while I was doing the
just
role?
even now, just seeing what's new, just any female character on Star Trek who you like a lot.
I love Laurel. I love Laurel. I really do. And of Mary. That combination is a great combination, that you can be an advocate and such an intellectual force and be involved in a Star Trek show that's on right now. That makes me really happy. Really, really happy.
Thank you. I'm like just trying not to cry right now. It's
Don't
fine.
cry. Melissa, okay, so Melissa loves Kira. Melissa, who else do you love so much? Who is one of your faves?
Well, before Kira, it was Guinan, but I love Laurel too. There's just so much richness to her and so much to learn about her, and she makes me want to learn more about her. And I want to see more stuff with Laurel and see where she came from. How did she become the head of her house?
Yeah,
because it is a male dominant society.
Yeah.
And what she does with her role as chancellor.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes, so tell people where to find you after Mary answers. I'm serious. I just want to do it before we, because we have like the countdown clock and it's like giving us stress.
Okay.
So just tell people after you talk, Mary, where to find you, and then any charities you'd like to champion, and Melissa and I'll do the same.
Okay, cool. Well, and truly, Kira is huge inspiration. I mean, Deep Space Nine, I got sucked in because of Kira and Dax and those characters and their unique journeys and their nuance, and like I said earlier, the way in which Nana and Terry brought themselves to the roles. It's a huge inspiration. And there's a really fun picture. I'm sure you remember this one out when I met you guys in Dortmund. I think it was. I was like, can we get a selfie? And it was like the greatest moment, because I do really feel that those characters, and doing this rewatch right now, I'm really, particularly Kira's fire, that anger, that letting her have that and yet be extremely vulnerable and there's so much nuance there, which again I credit so much to you, Nana, and what you brought to it. So it's a love fest, but it's such a real love fest, because I genuinely feel that way, and I'm just so grateful that we all get to be a part of this franchise together.
So where can we find you, Mary?
I am Mary the Chief on all platforms. So it's a play on my name. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Yeah.
Dana, what about you? Any find you and
only manage one at a time, it seems. So I'm Nana Visitor on Twitter. Can find
yay. Melissa?
Well, I'm on Malissa Longo everywhere.
Everywhere. And I am the recently switched over Amy Imhoff 1701 on Twitter and Instagram, and also wear a mask.
Yes.
Or the chancellor and the major will come for you. And go, yeah. So yeah, Melissa, wrap us.
Yes. We're wrapped. No. No, I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us, and this was such a fun chat. You're all some of my favorite people, so that means a lot too. And I want to thank Ryan for putting this up, Virtual Trek Con, for putting it together, because I know we're all missing Vegas and wishing that we could be together and give hugs, and I can't wait for Hug Fest.
I can't either. So thank you guys so much. This was so great, and thank you for letting us all just give this love fest for Laurel and Kira. This was fantastic.
It's an honor.
So great. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you all for watching.
Thanks, guys.